first time the three of us have all been on the air together since that game on Saturday. And, it's kind of well-plowed grounds at this point. I think that the through line with maybe all of our takeaways from that game is that, listen, I mean, getting blown out by 3 scores was always within the range of outcomes. I think none of us expected them to win. None of us picked them to win. I think the most concerning thing for all of us, and at different points this weekend, we all have sort of said this, was how it looked. That was, I think the best way to put it was the way that, I wrote it the other day. I mean, I don't know that it's discouraging. I don't know that it's, a condemnation on the Sherrone Moore era by any means, but I think it is sobering. It was a big time measuring stick, and they just flat out weren't ready for it. The coaches weren't ready for it. The players weren't ready for it. And there's a lot of work to do here. And this is a game week where you got Arkansas State, potential opportunity for a get right game. But I think a lot of eyes were open, not just within the fan base, but I kind of feel like they're surprised that it went that way too. What are your fellas' takes a few days out from that game?
Yeah, it was disappointing. Frankly, the lack of attention to detail, the fundamentals that were lacking, the lack of communication. It would have been one thing to play this team toe to toe and get beat physically and just, have a really good, hard hitting, fundamentally sound football game. And it was not that on the Michigan side. That you had linemen pulling into the backs of their centers. You had secondary that just didn't communicate. Linebacker play was awful. Tackling was terrible. When's the last time we could say that about a Michigan team? And that should never be the case, guys. It shouldn't, especially with that many returning starters and guys with experience on defense. To me, that was really disturbing. I thought your column was fantastic too. When you talk about guys on the field that were kind of jawing at each other a little bit. And I sensed a lack of leadership, whether it was coaching staff, whether it was players. That's what really bothered me the most. This did not look like a Michigan football team. And I thought, you nailed it when you said, even in the first Jim Harbaugh game of the first Harbaugh of his era at Utah, they looked like they belonged there. They did not look like they belonged this time. And in fact, there were some flashbacks of, 10 years ago, frankly, pre-Harbaugh that really bugged me. Now, that does not mean they can't improve. Maybe it was an anomaly. USC is going to tell us a ton, fellas. That is going to be the opportunity. Whatever happens against Arkansas State, that's going to be the opportunity for this team to prove that it's not as bad as it showed. And as Sherrone Moore said today, he said he didn't think they were that far from Texas. I don't know if I agree with him, but certainly if they can just clean up the basics, they're going to be a much better football team.
Yeah, and I don't know that he has anything, any other way to respond to that question, to be quite honest as well. So I didn't take a ton from that comment. It was clear on Saturday, though, that they were pretty far away, and it didn't seem like just a Saturday problem. It seemed like, maybe Michigan's not as good as a lot of people thought they were. And I will say I think Texas might be, or definitely is, pretty legit. I thought Texas was the better, more talented, better coached team that also played really well for what it is. Michigan did not look as good or as talented and didn't play as well as it could. So that amounts to what was a blowout victory. It could have been worse, certainly. Michigan played a little better in the second half. It didn't feel like Texas, did everything it could maybe in the second half. If it was a tight game, I'm sure they would have scored more than 7 points given the way things were going in the first half. But I thought Texas had a great game plan. They looked at the Michigan defense and said, okay, what are the strengths that we're going up against? It's the two guys in the middle, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, the corner on one side, Will Johnson, and the aggressive nature in which Wink Martindale calls the defense. And they used all of that to exploit Michigan. A lot of screens, a lot of stuff to the outside, tired out the defensive line, stayed away from Will Johnson. When Michigan got aggressive and got too far upfield in its pass rush lanes, Quinn Ewers was fantastic at stepping up, moving in the pocket, making the right plays and slinging it downfield. Michigan had obviously a ton of tackling issues. They missed 8 tackles according to PFF in this game. I do want to go back and see when the last time it was that they had that many missed tackles. And I'm sure there were more, because there were some other times when guys just weren't even in position to make a tackle, which is perhaps even a worse issue. So that was the most surprising part, was that the defense got carved up a little bit in the first half. And part of that was Michigan not staying on schedule offensively, not being able to stay on the field, losing the field position battle badly due to turnovers and, a bad punt too that had a bad bounce, unfortunate for Michigan. And that leads to these guys being gassed on the field. Kenneth Grant played a career high 60 snaps. His previous career high was 41. That was the week before against Fresno State. So clearly there's something here where this offense can't stay on the field. The defense doesn't have as much depth up front as they want. And that leads to Texas being able to kind of toy with you a little bit in that first half to build a 21-point lead.
I've been wrestling with this since doing the second rewatch on Sunday and after writing the column. I almost, and don't get me wrong, like, you would trade Saturday's result for a win by any stretch of the imagination. On the same token, I almost wonder if this is kind of a shock to the system that everyone needs, because really for the last several months, it's kind of been I don't want to say it's hubris, but there's been a confidence that despite replacing all of these pieces, backfilling all these pieces on the coaching staff, on the roster, that it's all good, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they know what the recipe is. I almost feel like everyone kind of needs that just knowing the recipe isn't enough. There's a lot of work that needs to be put in here. And there's not a single thing outside of Dominic Zavada that can't get better out there. And I think they know it. Sherrone Moore said it on Monday. He said it after the game Saturday as well. We need to see that now. And I know, if they, I think really the only thing you could do now is just win your way out of it, right? Like, you got to play a good, complete game on Saturday. You got to beat USC next week. I mean, if you come out of the next couple of weeks staring 2-2 in the face and you still really haven't fixed anything, I think that could be a kind of dark place to pull themselves out of. And the best coaches in at any level of sport have a way of like pulling their teams out of a dark place and making sure something like that doesn't happen again, or at least applying a lesson and getting guys sailing in the right direction. I mean, everything is so out of sync right now, and some of it takes time, some of it takes kind of putting egos aside and being what you are instead of what you'd like to be. So yeah, that's how I feel about that. We do have a 1999 super chat from Lori O, who says, when Ohio State loses, Jim Knowles stands up there and faces reporters. Even if he doesn't say anything, he faces the cameras. I want Wink to explain what he did to that defense. No game plan, no fundamentals, no tackling. I would just say overall, I'd like to hear from Michigan's coordinators a little bit more. Even when they were winning the last few years, we typically only get them once or twice a season.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't understand that either. But I don't think it's their decision. And I think if they were made available, if somebody were asked to ask them, "Hey, do you want to go out there?" They'd say, "Sure, I'll go out there and talk." And they aren't shying away from it, but they just aren't offered up to us. So, and that's disappointing. I don't remember Knowles standing up there and facing anybody after they lost to Michigan in 2022. Did he?
Yeah, he talked right after the game.
Oh, did he really? Well, good for him then. So,
poor guy.
Yeah. But again, it's up to Michigan to bring them to us. And I agree with that. I want to hear what they have to say. It was really a disappointment. It wasn't just you can talk about scheme and everything else. And we only know so much, right? And who's responsible for what. But overall, for them to look like that, they should be better than that with the talent that they have on defense. And we saw it. They're going to be fine against middling Big Ten teams and teams that don't have the offensive line that Texas does, because they have the talent up front to overwhelm a lot of people and the speed to overwhelm a lot of people, like we saw against Fresno. But there was really no excuse for that. Again, guys out of position, guys missing tackles. Those are things those are major red flags. And we can call it an overreaction like some people over here are saying. But to me, man, on that stage to look like that was extremely disappointing. And as far as the offense goes, they should, they are, again, it's the sum of the parts, right? And we saw this before the Jim Harbaugh era, like when Brady Hoke goes 5-7 with a lot of talent on that team that we saw, and everybody's saying, well, Jim Harbaugh could win 10 games with these guys. Well, he kind of did, right? And did not have the quarterback. They don't have the quarterback now that they did in Jake Rudock. Davis Warren is far from their biggest problem on offense, in my opinion. I'm seeing people over here calling for Alex Orji based on what, I have no idea. But to suggest that Davis Warren hasn't done anything right at all or is the biggest problem on this offense is certainly not accurate. And in fact, in the fourth quarter, he made some throws that I didn't know he was capable of making. And hopefully he'll continue to improve. But if you split the carries in practice and you don't allow your first string quarterback, at least for this year, to get as much experience as he can, he's going to continue to struggle. And he might anyway, because that offensive line's not doing him any favors.
You're exactly right. And one of the reasons why all offseason I kind of thought they were going to lose this game to Texas was because they had a quarterback battle. Seemed like they were going to go into fall camp with that battle. I felt the offense wouldn't be up to speed early on in the season, and that Texas kind of knew what it was. I mean, they had transfers right at wide receiver, but clearly they have their chemistry down. And Quinn Ewers, if you're a great quarterback and really potentially the Heisman winner this year, it's really early to say that, but he looks like he's certainly somebody who could be in New York. Then chemistry is pretty easy to have, right? And with that offensive line too, that helps as well with the timing and everything else. So, but Michigan didn't have that benefit, and you throw in Jack Tuttle's injury as a factor as well. So, coming into camp, they didn't know exactly what they were going to have. I do think it was a mistake, probably, especially if Davis Warren is, clearly your guy, to go into game week last week before the Fresno game, not knowing who your starter is. Those reps are really valuable. And we've seen quite a few times early in this season already where timing's been off. The quarterback doesn't read the defense, the right defense, and the wide receiver does, or the quarterback does read what the defense is in and the wide receiver doesn't, or the tight end doesn't, like on the interception that was intended for Colston Loveland, or the drop to Samaj Morgan. That was on Davis Warren on that third down because he thought Samaj was going to keep going. It was zone. He sat down, and the ball was too far inside, and he was only able to get one hand on it. So those things that in a big game against potentially a top 5 team, it certainly is their top 3 team now in the new rankings. You can't have that stuff. You can't still be getting up to speed like you're a team in the first or second week of camp on offense and not a team that's ready to go for a big game. That's what it looked like Michigan is. I think they'll improve. They have a long way to go in a short amount of time with the USC game coming up, like you guys said. But a lot has to get better right away. And like you guys both said in the Super Chat said, the defense was probably the most disappointing part, given what we knew they had coming back. Because we know there's talent there. We've seen these guys play well. Even Jayshon Barn, we've seen him play well at Maryland, but it didn't come together in the big game, which is extremely disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, I come out of this game, there's absolutely no excuse for that defensive performance. You have guys that are at least projected to be first-round picks on the defensive line who were the nail and not the hammer for really the first time in a long time. Too much miscommunication. I didn't think the game plan was great. Now, again, early on in that game, you're winning the early downs, but in crunch time, in those third and whatever situations, Texas has a killer at quarterback, and that's what Michigan had last year in those situations. And I think that was the biggest kind of juxtaposition, is that, you saw what it looks like when the other side has it compared to what Michigan was the last few years.